Good morning, Mark.
Good morning, Simon.
Here's another episode of The Impact Narrative.
It is. Perhaps we should explain what it's about, Simon.
Well, I was just going to say cue the frame.
Oh, the frame, yeah. There it is.
Excellent. So, Mark, The Impact Narrative.
It is, yes.
Yes.
Yeah, so, well, it's a half an hour segment in which we just prattle on, really, about various things.
It is.
We'll discuss current affairs. Oh, is it? Is
a
it
vlog, a video log.
a video blog or whatever?
There is a podcast as well that's going to be up on SoundCloud. It's just a chance for Mark and I to catch up, really, I guess.
Yeah, how are you?
Oh, I'm doing well, thank you. Other than being very wet from being drenched by buses and cars and lorries and vans that drove past as I was waiting at a bus stop.
Yeah, it's surprising that the weather hasn't been very
Strange.
good recently.
No, and there are puddles in the road. Who saw that coming?
Yeah, well, you know, it's strange things happening.
Although
we live in strange times.
We do indeed. I must say, Mark, this isn't as bad as the weather in Saudi right now. In Saudi Arabia, there are huge floods across Jeddah, Riyadh, all types of places in Saudi. And I mean, this is quite bad to the point where people are able to water ski down the road.
Ah.
There was a wonderful video, wonderful on so many levels, of a woman in a burqa water skiing down a road, being towed by a van.
That's legal in Saudi Arabia, is it?
I don't think that's covered by the Sharia. So,
right.
There'll have
So
to
we
be
better
some
watch
kind
what
of
we say.
edict by some clerics. But for now, it's on Twitter, so
Right. Oh well, it must be true then.
have a watch. Okay,
Yeah.
Mark, today's a big day, isn't it, in British politics?
It's a big day in British sport.
It is.
But
So,
yeah,
which
this is
more
politics.
important, do you think?
Well, yeah, probably the sport. I would think there'd be more people interested in the sport than there are in the budget, which is happening today.
So it's the budget versus the Ashes.
Yes, my money is on the Ashes, to be honest.
Yeah, but we're probably more qualified to talk about the budget.
No, I doubt it.
Oh,
but
okay.
anyway, yeah, so the budget, well, you know, obviously it's now an autumn/winter fest rather than a spring fest.
Why did that move?
Well, I guess because there always used to be a financial... In the autumn, there used to be a kind of public expenditure statement, whereas the earlier one was more about changes in taxation. And really, the public expenditure statement is more important than the taxation one. At least, and so they kind of moved or everything into one event rather than having two events, one in the spring, one in the autumn.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
So, what are we expecting today?
Well, we're expecting, obviously there are people who are looking for some gestures on the housing market. The Conservative Party has suddenly realised that the housing market in Britain is a little bit irrational, maybe.
Really?
And so house building projects, I mean, it seems that with the government preoccupied with so many other things, it's the focus of austerity has kind of shifted a little bit, and voices, ideas which at one point were ruled out because the government was more concerned with cutting, that now it's more of a case of relaxing the restraints. And what Mr. Hammond, the Chancellor, will be saying, I guess, is that we need Britain to be fighting fit for the challenges of Brexit, which, of course, he as a former Remainer will be trying desperately now to appear to be keen on the opportunities that lie ahead for Britain. However, we may just have to change our economic policy a bit to make sure that we don't just kind of...
So there's a lot at stake for the country, but there's also a lot at stake for Mr. Hammond himself. He's been on the ropes a little bit recently.
Well, he has, yeah. Well, rumours that he and the Prime Minister are not getting on very well, but we knew before that he wasn't getting on very well with a few other of his cabinet colleagues. And yeah, so his position is extremely interesting. The trouble with the Chancellor, that when the Chancellor falls out with the Prime Minister, it's usually very bad news for the government, but this is a government for which any news is kind of a distraction from the overall. So it's kind of good news that they can concentrate on the personality clashes rather than the other problems that may be.
The politics.
It's a refreshing change for them to be bickering about. But one remembers the problems between Gordon Brown and Alistair Darling. This is old news for everyone apart from us. And Gordon Brown really did try quite hard to push Alistair Darling out when Alistair Darling stopped being quite as amenable as Mr. Brown expected him to be. Gordon Brown tried to move him away from the Treasury, and he wouldn't budge. And this could be a similar story. That basically, if there is any government position which is powerful now, it is the Chancellor. And so a trial of strength between number 10 and number 11 is likely to result in a horrible, messy stalemate.
Yeah, I'd hate to be living on that street right now.
Yeah,
Like
well, the neighbours
that you'd hear.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, yeah. The
Mark,
ASBOs being
exactly. Are they still things?
issued.
I don't know.
Well, whatever they're now called.
But this isn't just about the now for Mr. Hammond. It's also about the future and any type of aspirations that he might have toward leadership or maintaining prominent positions in the cabinet come the next reshuffle, or indeed the next Conservative government.
Yeah, well, I would imagine one way or another. As I say, I think he's pretty unsackable, and just like other people one might mention, because any further disunity within this party based on personalities, when there are so many other reasons to fall out, is just not something the party can afford. In terms of overall ambition, I would think that nowadays, if you're sensible, your ambition would be fulfilled by being Chancellor of the Exchequer. It means that, because nowadays, without being too cynical, the big incentive to be Prime Minister is all the after dinner speeches that you can give when you stop being Prime Minister, and all the money that you can make from that.
Ooh,
I'm not sure about the present incumbent, or indeed Gordon Brown maybe, but certainly others you could mention have had their eye on the opportunities for making money after being Prime Minister. Being Prime Minister is a step in your career towards, riches and retirement, whatever.
Fame and fortune.
Exactly, and Mr. Hammond, I think, probably will already be earmarked for that circuit.
Right. Okay.
He'll have some interesting tales to tell anyway.
I'm sure he
will. People say he's incredibly boring. They call him Spreadsheet Phil or whatever. I don't see he's more boring. There are other people who are supposed to be charismatic in the Conservative Party who don't just bore me, but also make me want to smash the television set.
I think that can be said for a range of other parties as well, right?
Oh, well, yeah, but we're talking particularly about, because the other thing about this statement is that the leader of the opposition has to respond to it without knowing what's going to be in it in advance. And so there'll be some opportunity for the Tories to make a bit of a fight back, because just the odds against making a really good response to a budget speech are so long that you can already imagine that in the Daily Mail, perhaps, already deciding that it's all going to be about how terrible the opposition is.
I think it's an opportunity for Mr. Corbyn, though, isn't it, to demonstrate any leadership credentials that he might have, or the aspirations to be Prime Minister. And if he can do a good performance, then that will certainly raise his stock. But like you say, I think many would imagine that it's a difficult ask.
It's very difficult. I mean, and again, the thing about the Tories, if they're talking about housing, one of the big problems for them is that a big house building programme is going to activate a lot of their supporters, because it probably will mean building on maybe even Greenbelt or whatever, and so it's really not a winning issue for them, whereas Mr. Corbyn, I think, could probably make some capital on this subject. So it'll be interesting, but what is also interesting is that whereas it used to be the major news event of the day on Budget Day, and the pictures of the Chancellor waving his dispatch box around, whatever, that kind of thing, I think those days the focus has shifted just a little, and there are other news items which are certainly jostling for prominence with the budget.
But I think it is good to be talking about these nitty-gritty issues of governance that are also often overlooked by international affairs, by debate on Brexit, leadership debate, because fundamentally the job of government is to improve the regulation of life and to facilitate people having a good life.
Well, that's the theory. That's the old way of looking at things. I think now but the point of Budget Day in particular is to try to shore up support for one's party. Anyway, but that's being unduly cynical, and I've taken up the allotted 5 minutes on the budget, so we'll move on to the
budget. So, in other news, the Ashes start tonight.
Yes.
Big cricket encounter, England v Australia. moving on.
Yeah, well, that's one of the things that I think, certainly listening to my and your favourite radio programme this morning, it's more about the Ashes than it is about the budget.
I think so. I mean, it's an encounter that happens once every 18 months or so. 5 test matches played out across some pretty taxing conditions for English players, conditions that they're not necessarily used to.
People bowling at them fast.
Very
things
quickly,
like that.
yeah, exactly. Hot weather, dry weather, looking outside and...
Well, no, except it's going to rain at the at Brisbane, apparently. Yeah, so we're safe. There's a chance. There's a chance of a draw. We're going to park the bus, I think.
Excellent. The Jose style of cricket.
Yeah, Alistair Cook will be out for naught, but it'll be
302.
Yeah, one of those, but somewhere in that range maybe. But it'll be a defensive prod. I think he'll be in for 50. I'm not trying to make specific predictions.
Right.
He'll be in for 15 deliveries.
Okay.
There'll be 1 leg by, but the score will be 1 when he nicks it to second slip.
Right. A bold prediction. Quite a depressing prediction.
But that will have delayed things for 15 deliveries.
Oh, it will,
and that will bring us closer to the much desired draw.
The bus is edging towards the wicket ever so slowly. But
so what's your
remember,
prediction?
It does have 4 or 5 days, even 5 days, to get over the wicket.
Yeah, I mean, this is the trouble that test matches are supposed to last 5 days, but buying a ticket for the 5th day of a test match is a mistake, isn't it?
Well, it's a lottery. You can either end up with a wonderful, tense finale or nothing.
Well, no, the match is over.
Exactly.
It's either raining or the match is over in 2.5 days. So what's your prediction,
My
Simon?
prediction, 3-1.
Right.
Australia.
What, to Australia? Right, so you think we'll win 1?
I think we'll get 1.
Right.
But we have 4 debutants.
Yeah.
Which I think is an adventurous move, but an exciting move. Phil Tufnell this morning was very excited. He called it a very adventurous decision, really taking it to the Australians.
Yeah.
But I guess we'll see.
Yeah,
so
we
that
will.
Starts tomorrow morning, midnight.
It does. Watch this space.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Well, but except that by the time anyone watches this or listens to it, the match will be over.
Nick, Twan,
and they'll think that my prediction of Alistair Cook will have been based, in fact, on knowledge of what happened.
This is filmed on Wednesday.
Can we show a clock or something?
Wednesday at 11:30, 11:25.
Right.
The match starts in 12.5 hours.
Good.
So, very prescient of you, Mark, to talk about Cook's early dismissal. But I think this has been covered by a lot of media outlets. But you wanted to talk about one in particular, didn't you?
Well, I do. Yeah. Well, the Daily Mail.
So
yeah.
Should we talk about that now, or should we talk about travel news?
I think we could do travel news and see if we've got time for the Daily Mail one.
We'll always have time to talk about the Daily Mail. Travel news is, I think it's important just to talk about trains.
I think so
People
too.
love trains or hate them. But I'm going to talk about their utility, how useful they are. And in recent times, they've proved incredibly frustrating to me and a lot of other people who take one of the busiest routes in the country. I'm not outlining exactly what the route is.
No, I think we should leave that to one side.
But it is pretty obvious if you do a bit of Googling and you think about where we might be filming this from in Lancaster. But I was on a train recently, and this train was incredibly busy. There was no space to sit down. There was barely a space to stand up, including down the aisles in between the seats. It was unsafe. It was unsafe for people sitting down. It was unsafe for people in between the seats. There was no chance of getting to a bathroom. If there had been a serious health scare or even a mild health scare, there was no recourse to any medical help. So I got in touch with this rail company, and they mentioned that there were always staff on the train to help in case of emergency, which is good. It's good to know that there is this level of support. But they weren't able to be reached because there was no space to move on the train. So I pointed this out. I said that this is perhaps not the most safe way of having transport, and said that there seemed to be too many people on the train. To which the response was, well, we don't limit the number of people on trains. We don't have a maximum capacity of people who can fit on a particular train. Which seems problematic to me, given that space is finite. There is a limited amount of space on a train.
That's a topic for another day, I think.
Or perhaps, but within the context of a train.
Well, I mean, obviously there's restrictions, as we know very well, the number of people on a bus.
Exactly.
So yeah, I'm not sure. Do you ever see a thing saying maximum capacity? Obviously not.
I've not seen one on a train, but it seems to me that that's something that really needs to be looked into, just in terms of safety and practicality and logistically. And I know there's been a lot of talk about investment in infrastructure, rail infrastructure in the south. And this is something that I think George Osborne was actually quite keen on doing. He was quite keen to invest in the infrastructure in the north, that northern powerhouse.
Yeah.
But if you look at some of the train lines and at some of the trains themselves, it's clear that they're in dire need of investment.
Yeah, absolutely.
And modernisation. That was my little rant.
Well, no, I think the revelation, I think it's a scoop, really, for this this vlog, or whatever it's called.
Yes.
That there is no official... It's almost like a programme that most people won't remember called That's Life, where they used to, it was a consumer programme, and there'd be a story similar to yours, and it was somebody would tell the story, and then somebody would do the voice of the company that was being complained about, and that person would say, "It's nothing to do with us," or words to that effect.
I remember that, but
there we go. There's exactly like that. But that is if there's no restriction, then I would imagine that that needs to be looked into.
I'm going to certainly refer this on to the Ombudsman, because it's
go for it.
It's not a safe thing to do, and obviously trains are delayed. We understand that things happen, but I mean, this train is regularly delayed, 20 minutes, half an hour each day, and then there are these safety concerns.
Oh well, the safety concerns are
it's a serious concern, I think.
Because the other thing is that if there are lots of people on the train, I mean, we know that there's controversy now about the number of people on the train employed by the train companies. It could be an argument for, in fact, only having the driver, because if there are lots of people to help, then it'll just make the train even more overcrowded.
But the number of people isn't restricted, remember, Mark, so
that's
they could maybe even put more staff on. Yeah,
maybe there should be some kind of way of... having the staff maybe strapped to the roof or something like that.
An Indian train.
Well, no, they're inside.
Oh, inside, right.
And then they could swoop down, they could be on elastic or something, and swoop down to attend to anyone who needs help.
So if any of you are technologically proficient and can develop some kind of harness.
A harness for,
Okay, but what it did do, Mark, is it gave me a lot of chance to read. Obviously I couldn't move anywhere.
And so do you have a book of the week?
Not particularly, no.
No. Well, there is this one, which is not the book of the week, but it's just a book.
Oh.
Right.
Excellent.
But yeah, what are you reading at the moment?
So I'm reading a number of things. I'm sure you can guess what one of them is.
What, this book?
I'm not reading that. No, not anymore.
No?
No, I'm done with that one. That was a thrilling read, a real page turner.
Page turner.
No.
What else do you do with pages?
Look at the first one and
well, we know that somebody does that, one of our colleagues. Anyway, go on.
No, I'm reading some philosophy, some Giorgio Agamben, as per our reading group, which is a really interesting discussion forum to get to grips with some of these political, theological ideas and how it shapes sovereign life. So that's really fascinating, but I'm also reading some fiction. Right.
And is it about the Third Reich?
It is. It is. I found it just a fascinating area.
But what's the name of the book that you can recommend to our vlogger people? He's forgotten, that's good.
Zoo Station, this one is called.
Oh, right.
Zoo Station. And it's interesting, just the whole topic area, because I find that it's a means through which you can understand how agency operates within a whole type of structures.
I can imagine that on the back cover blurb.
Well, exactly, yeah. Very academic.
They'd fly off the shelves.
It really would. How agency operates within structure.
Yeah.
But I think fiction
I want to read it already.
Understandable. Fiction is a really powerful tool in this sense, just to allow people to engage with contexts and with issues that they wouldn't necessarily be able to get to grips with. And this area for me is fascinating because it tells the story of humanity and what humanity is capable of, both good and bad, in a range of different contexts. So
it's about time these themes were addressed in fiction, I would have thought.
Yeah. Long overlooked.
Yeah, indeed.
So what about you, Mark? What are you reading?
Well, I'm afraid for people who watched or listened to this programme in the past, I'm now getting towards the end of my co-authored book on Pitt the Younger and
Ooh.
Charles James Fox, and
Well,
so
this is exciting.
I'm back into those. Yeah, so nothing. But I could recommend this book, British Foreign Policy since 1945, and you know, the pages are turnable.
They are indeed. I'd ask you who the authors are, Mark, but I don't want to be accused of plugging people's work.
Exactly.
Unduly, so we shouldn't mention that.
No, Robert Smith was involved in the writing
I know
of it.
Robert Smith.
Do you? Well, what a coincidence. Anyway, so you want to talk about foreign policy in Zimbabwe?
Yeah, I think we need to talk about international news. There's a lot that's been happening in the Middle East, in Africa, in the Balkans. So there's just breaking news that...
yes. Radko Mladic.
Indeed.
Yeah.
Thank you for pronouncing that for me. Has been found guilty of genocide and crimes against humanity. And I think that's quite an important legal decision, but also a really important moment for people who were involved in this conflict, which was intractable. It was hugely catastrophic, massive number of deaths, destruction, infrastructural damage, ethnically driven, with religious undertones, and for those people affected by it, those people who had an involvement in it, this will be some kind of movement, not towards closure, but towards a sense of justice, I think. Now, I don't think that with this type of conflict you'll ever get a form of closure.
No.
But a sense of justice, I think, is important. So I think that this is the right decision to have been reached here.
Yeah, but still, I mean, obviously the issue has moved on. Bosnia seems, by all accounts, to be still a country that hasn't recovered, or
No,
you know,
exactly.
with mass unemployment, youth unemployment particularly, and a period which, you know, what, 20 years. I mean, that's the thing. It took him. I think, was it 15 years he was on the run or something. It was a remarkable story of, you would say, the inability of the international community, first of all, to prevent these things happening in the first place, but then to round up the known, very well-known culprit. It wasn't exactly a secret that this person, and eventually, I guess, there is some kind of closure in the fact he's been convicted of genocide, because the interesting thing, of course, was that the UN had difficulty, or certain countries had difficulty in defining what was going on as genocide. But that in that case it might well be seen as a landmark that it's now that murder on that scale, an ethnic cleansing of that kind, is now defined as something which the UN would have to take action against.
Exactly, there is now precedent.
Yeah.
And I think that's really key. I think you're right to flag up the potential pitfalls and the problems within the international community, but how they respond to these types of questions, as in what responsibilities states have, what type of obligations there are, and when states should interfere, if indeed they should interfere. So there are serious philosophical and political questions that must be addressed in this sense. But just from a humanitarian perspective, this idea of justice and working towards justice politically and legally, I think, is key. And having this type of verdict, while not obviously resolving all of the deeper structural issues at play in Bosnia, I think is symbolic and important for the state and the region as a whole.
And then the other thing, you're going to talk about Zimbabwe, which has got certain, because you would have thought maybe that what has happened in Zimbabwe has happened rather too late. You know, that the suffering, whatever, has already largely, you know, so much of it has happened already. But
you've got
anyway.
Mugabe's 37-year rule that's finally come to an end as of yesterday. I started my lecture with a moment of quiet reflection for the life and times of Robert Mugabe.
Oh, really?
Which was short and not very sweet, but we found out that he has gone. But there's a question as to the nature of his resignation. Is this a constitutional act, or is this being forced from office by the military, which makes it, by definition, a coup d'état, which is more problematic for what's to follow. So he's written this letter that says that he's stepping down for the good of the country, for the good of Zimbabwe and moving forward. But I think there's a question as to whether that is a constitutional act that gives, that can locate power in his successor, the former vice president. But of course this was all emerging because it appeared that Mugabe was trying to clear the way for his much younger wife.
Yeah.
his 52-year-old wife to take power.
Yeah, well, I mean
this is 93.
Yeah, I mean it seems to me that I mean that's the problem, that it was clear that the military thought that this was a step too far, and that a successor should be chosen, you know, on the basis perhaps of known affinity for the military, rather than being a member of the Mugabe family. And so obviously, just like I thought anyway, that this bears a lot of the hallmarks of the Arab Spring, where, you know, the country rejoices, and I don't think there are too many people whose name is not Mugabe who are unhappy about what's happened. But the trouble is that the military will clearly have plans to maintain the kind of regime that Mugabe presided over.
Of course. Well, what we see, of course, is that the new president of Zimbabwe is the former vice president.
Yeah, well, quite.
Mugabe's vice president. Who was complicit in the repression of opposition, who was complicit in the repression of various groups that were operating at this time.
And corruption too. I mean, this is a country which has so much economic potential, which has been blighted by the rule of Mugabe. And when you consider things like the change in South Africa, you know, because obviously in the old days, the days of the illegal Smith regime, you had a very tight relationship between South Africa and Rhodesia, and under Mugabe it seems that you know, the same kind of constructive relationship to help Zimbabwe to kind of construct a new future for itself, free from colonial rule, that just hasn't happened, you know.
Exactly.
So
I don't think it will happen with this move, be it constitutionally or be it through or done at gunpoint, toward the rule of Mnangagwa, which I think is how you pronounce it.
Well, you're great at these things, so
thank you very much.
Yeah, but he's not somebody who was really taught. All the focus was always on Mugabe, like a one-person rule, not just a one-party rule.
This was an individual who was his spy chief. This isn't just someone who was sort of peripheral. He was a very prominent figure in the Mugabe rule.
And that's why it's got to be seen as a coup. I mean, obviously there are going to be elections, but then it seems that partly Mugabe resigned because had there been an impeachment process, the opposition groups would have made it the price of their participation in the impeachment that there were guarantees about the freedom and the fairness of the election. So it doesn't augur well
Well,
at
the
all.
constitutional argument suggests that that Mugabe steps down, and the new president will retain office for a further 10 months, I think, for the remainder of Mugabe's term. I use that loosely, with the suggestion that elections will take place at the end of that period. But of course, there's no guarantee. And if you accept or if you reject that it's constitutional and that this actually is undertaken at gunpoint, then you could very easily be stuck with a 73-year-old president who's replaced a 92-year-old president. Oh, sorry, a 93-year-old president. So,
well, but this is where obviously Britain can't even be seen to be involved in this, which itself is, you know, in the 1960s when Rhodesia declared illegal independence, it was embarrassing for Britain that it still had some responsibilities for the area. I think Britain would much rather that the whole thing had been taken off its agenda, whereas now I think that this would be a time where if Britain did retain any influence, it could use it quite constructively. However, you know, I would say the country with the most influence, apart from South Africa, is China. And whether what they would want, of course, would be a stable Zimbabwe, and stability and democracy in that part of the world may not be seen as all that compatible.
Well, so I don't think it's necessarily that, Mark. I think that the bigger problem is this structural problem, that the structure of Zimbabwean politics and society and the economy has been so stagnant and so much coalescing around the regime of Mugabe that to have any real transformation and to move toward a more inclusive form of political life, that has to change all of those political structures. And doing that will incur a great deal of unrest and turmoil, regardless of what that vision might be toward where it should go.
Yeah.
But we know that Chinese involvement in states with the provision of aid and engagement economically is without strings. It's not so much bothered about having commitment toward human rights or democracy or elections or anything like that. It tends to give aid without strings attached.
Yeah.
So I think that China obviously can exert a lot of influence, but I think it's a contested area, and I think that what will happen is actually quite worrying in the coming weeks.
Yeah, no, I think so. I mean, obviously, it's great. Again, it's a bit like Mladic that somebody has finally, a kind of justice has caught up with somebody who's clearly a blot on humanity's conscience.
Well, you say justice, Mark, but there's a question about what he's going to do now. Is he going to stay in Zimbabwe, where he could face impeachment, he could face prison time, or is he going to flee to Dubai, Singapore, where he can capitalise on his vast property portfolios?
Well, he can, I mean, but I would have thought that a person like that, with an insatiable lust to stay in office way beyond his sell-by date, that the loss of power is probably the biggest punishment that a person like that can face. That anything else is preferable. So in a way, well, Joe, you would say, yeah, justice, obviously, if he was put in front of the courts, then an awful lot of people who were connected with him in the military, etc., would find themselves in hot water. So that's not going to happen, is it?
No,
but that's what I mean by justice, that in the end a tyrant ends up, that they run out of road in the end.
Yeah,
but again, very belatedly, it has been a very long road.
It has. I mean, this is a 37-year long road. I've seen people on Twitter who have been celebrating the sense that they're in their 30s and they haven't known anything other than Mugabe's rule, which is it's a crazy thought. It's beyond comprehension.
Yeah. Good. Anyway, so lots of interesting things. But I think we're coming to the end of our allotted stint.
Approaching the end. But Mark, do you want to mention the Daily Mail, or should we save that for?
I think we'll save that for another time. That's a juicy subject. That's a long-running subject about freedom of speech, etc. And tide times, I think, are probably.
Well, I think tides have gone out the window with this rain.
Yeah. Well, the tides is certainly in.
Right. I think we can safely say that. But anyway, as always, what you can do to keep up to speed with the latest updates from the Richardson Institute is do something below us.
Hey?
I don't think you can do it right now, but if you click below our video somewhere, you can see that you can subscribe to us, you can follow us, you can keep up to speed with our Twitter page. Apparently we have an Instagram page now, which is very exciting. You can go to our website, which is in the process of being updated, and yeah, you can keep up to speed with more of what we're doing. So this podcast will be available on SoundCloud in the coming hours, hopefully, if all goes according to plan.
I didn't understand any of that, but it all sounds very good.
It did. I was half expecting you to look under the table, Mark, just to see what was...
I did, momentarily, actually.
Right.
My eyes went down there. I was thinking that there was something there. But
well, on that note,
yeah.
until next time.
Until next time, Simon, it's been nice catching up with you.
Likewise, so I'll see you in the corridor in about 30 seconds.
Presumably.
Great.
But don't tell them that. It's like make it seem like it's a great reunion once a week.
Once a week for the Impact Narrative.
For the Impact Narrative.
And we're out. Thank you.